Before you sleep. It's time to sleep, but before you go, there's something I really want you to know. I love you much more than a big sandy beach, with sand dunes so high they seem far out of reach. I love you much more than the things that we've made on a hot sunny day with our bucket and spade. To build a castle from sand would be great, with seaweed for a roof and seashells for a gate. We could run to the rocks, we could use them as blocks, and for a flag on the top we could use someone's socks. I love you much more than a big sandy beach. I love you much more than the sun, moon and stars, even much more than the red planet Mars. I love you much more than the outer space tune sung to the world by the man on the moon. If we could fly in a big rocket ship, what fun we would have on our magical trip. We could speed through the clouds to the heavens above and tell our outer space aliens all about love. I love you much more than the sun, moon and stars. I love you much more than the burning bright sun. I love it so much when we play and have fun. I love you much more than the world's tallest trees, even much more than a hug and a squeeze. If we were a bee, think of all we could see as we fly to the top of the world's tallest tree. We could fly all around the daisies and roses, floating on the air with sweet smells for our noses. I love you much more than the burning bright sun. I love you much more than the deepest blue sea. I love you so much when you swim beside me. I love you much more than the sea's octopuses, going to school on their submarine buses. If we could sail on a big pirate ship, we could walk the long plank and take a quick dip. How great it would be to find us some treasure, made up of toys that would be such a pleasure. I love you much more than the deepest blue sea. I love you much more than the world's biggest plane that could fly us up high and away from the rain. I love you so much when I hold your sweet hand as we speed through the air to a faraway land. To fly around the world in a big jumbo jet would be a great trip that we'd never forget. High up in the skies we'd get such a surprise to see wonderful things with our very own eyes. I love you much more than the world's biggest plane. I love you much more than a big dinosaur that ruled over the earth with his big scary roar. I love you much more than a big grizzly bear who could scare a T-Rex with a very cross stare. If we could travel back into the past in a big time machine, we would have such a blast. We would find a volcano, dress up as cavemen, and watching it exploding again and again. I love you much more than a big dinosaur. I love you much more than a Halloween night when we dress up as ghosts and give people a fright. I love you much more than a witch loves her broom, mixing up potions in her spell-making room. If we could dress up and do trick-or-treats, we could fill up our bag with some nuts and some sweets. We could light a candle in a big pumpkin's head and eat some of our sweets before we went to bed. I love you much more than a Halloween night. I love you much more than a Christmas Eve night when Santa makes Rudolph's red nose shine so bright. I love you much more than the elves' clever tricks used to make presents that every child picks. If we could fly to the North Pole and land, we could deliver our letter to Santa by hand. We could help all the elves load up Santa's sleigh and wave to the reindeers as they fly away. I love you much more than a Christmas Eve night. I love you much more than the world's biggest truck, picking up boulders and scooping up muck. I love you much more than red dynamite that makes a big bang with red flashes of light. If I drove a crane and you drove a digger, we could both work together to make mountains bigger. We could dress up as builders with bright yellow hats and build some apartments for eagles and bats. I love you much more than the world's biggest truck. I love you much more than the world's biggest slide even much more than a roller coaster ride. I love you much more than a big theme parade with singing and dancing and sweet music played. To go to a fun park would be so magic. We could buy a big ice cream and give it a lick. Imagine that day if you could be boss. You could buy sugar popcorn and eat candy floss. I love you much more than the world's biggest slide. The person who loves you so much like no other is the person that loves you the most, and your mother. She loves you so much 'cause you grew in her tummy, and that is why she is your wonderful mummy. Night, night, sleep tight, my bundles of joy. I love you so much more than my favourite toy. My love for you is as bright as sunlight. Sweet dreams, my love, I bid you good night. Night, night, sleep tight, my bundles of joy.